It was supposed to be over by Christmas. That was the promise made to millions of young men marching off to war in the summer of 1914. They left their farms, their factories, and their families filled with a sense of patriotic duty. They believed they were fighting for glory, for honor, and for a swift, decisive victory. This conflict, however, would not be swift. It would not be glorious. It would become a 4-year nightmare that would devour an entire generation. This was World War I, the Great War. It would leave scars on the earth and on the human soul. Before 1914, the world looked very different. Austro-Hungarian Empire, Ottoman Empire, Russian Empire. Their borders seemed permanent, their power unshakable. Warfare was thought to be understood: cavalry charges, decisive battles. Society had a stable order, or so people believed. But the Great War shattered all of that. It was a meat grinder that consumed empires, toppled monarchies, and redrew the map of Europe and the Middle East. It was the first industrial war. New technologies of death were unleashed. The old ways of fighting were made obsolete overnight. The scale of devastation is hard to grasp. Over 16 million people lost their lives. Soldiers, civilians. More than 20 million were wounded, many with injuries they never recovered from. Entire towns and villages wiped off the map, turned into wastelands of mud, craters, and barbed wire. The war brought trench warfare, poison gas, and relentless artillery bombardments. Psychological trauma, shell shock afflicted survivors for life. Not just a war between armies, but a war against people. A total war that erased the line between battlefield and home front. Why does it still matter today? Because our modern world was forged in its fires. Political tensions in the Middle East, the rise of new global powers, and the seeds of the Second World War were sown in the fields of Flanders and the diplomatic halls of Versailles. Understanding WW1 isn't just history, it's understanding the present. It helps us see how nations can stumble into catastrophic conflicts, how technology can outpace morality, and how the decisions of a few can bring suffering to so many. This is the story of how our modern world began. The story of World War I can often feel overwhelming. It is a complex web of alliances, battles, political maneuvers, spread across multiple continents. 4 long years. It is easy to get lost in the names, dates, and places. That is why our goal here is to provide a clear and direct path through the chaos. We will guide you step by step, making sense of how and why this global catastrophe unfolded. This is not a lecture filled with confusing jargon. This is a straightforward account of the facts, designed to give you a solid understanding of the war from start to finish, all in the time it takes to drink a cup of coffee. We will begin by untangling the 4 main causes that set the stage for war. The first is a system of complex alliances. The second is militarism. The third is imperialism. The final cause is nationalism. These 4 forces made war not just possible, but likely. Our journey will follow a clear chronological timeline of events. We will start with the single spark that ignited the explosion: the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand. In Sarajevo, June 1914. You will see how this one event triggered a chain reaction, pulling nations in one by one through the alliance system. We will then move through the major phases of the war, exploring the key battles on the Western Front and the Eastern Front. We will look at the introduction of new, terrifying technologies, tanks, chemical weapons, and we will examine the immense human cost in the trenches. And for civilians back home, we will cover crucial turning points, including the entry of the United States into the war and the collapse of Russia after its revolution. Finally, we arrive at the war's end in November 1918 and its profound consequences. We will discuss the treaties that ended the fighting but created new problems, the empires that fell, and the new world that emerged from the ashes. This is the 15-minute deep dive that will help you truly understand the war that shaped the 20th century and still influences our world today. Long before the first shots were fired in 1914, Europe was a continent sitting on a powder keg. A dangerous mix of forces had been building up for decades, creating an atmosphere of tension and suspicion. At the heart of this was a complex web of alliances. These were formal agreements between nations, promising to defend one another if attacked. By 1914, Europe was divided into two armed camps. On one side stood the Triple Alliance: Germany, Austria-Hungary, Italy. On the other was the Triple Entente: France, Russia, Great Britain. These alliances were meant to keep the peace by creating a balance of power. Instead, they ensured that any regional dispute could quickly escalate into a massive, continent-wide war. Fueling this tense standoff was a rampant culture of militarism. Across Europe, the great powers were locked in a massive arms race. Germany, a newly unified and ambitious nation, began expanding its navy to challenge Great Britain's long-held dominance of the seas. This naval race was incredibly expensive and created deep hostility between the two nations. On land, armies grew larger. Military leaders gained enormous influence. Generals drew up elaborate and aggressive war plans, like Germany's Schlieffen Plan, designed for a quick, two-front war against both France and Russia. The message was clear. War was not only seen as a possibility, but as a tool of state policy. This military buildup was closely linked to imperialism, the fierce competition for colonies and global influence. The great powers of Europe scrambled to build vast overseas empires, seeking raw materials, new markets, strategic advantages. This scramble for Africa and the rivalry for control in Asia created flashpoints far from Europe. Tensions between France and Germany over Morocco, for example, nearly led to war on two separate occasions. Imperial ambition fueled a sense of rivalry and a belief that a nation's greatness was measured by the size of its empire. This competition added another layer of distrust. The final, and perhaps most explosive ingredient, was nationalism. This was an intense, often aggressive form of patriotism that swept across the continent. In countries like Germany, France, nationalism bred a deep-seated rivalry, with France still bitter over its defeat and loss of territory in the Franco-Prussian War of 1870. But nationalism was also a disruptive force within the old empires. In the Austro-Hungarian Empire, a sprawling and diverse state, numerous ethnic groups like Serbs, Croats, Czechs dreamed of creating their own independent nation. This desire for self-determination, particularly in the volatile Balkan region, created a constant threat of rebellion and conflict, making the area known as the powder keg of Europe. The spark that finally ignited Europe's powder keg was fired on a sunny morning in the city of Sarajevo. On June 28, 1914, Archduke Franz Ferdinand, the heir to the throne of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, was visiting the Bosnian capital with his wife, Sophie. The date itself was significant. It was a national holiday for Serbs, and the visit was seen by many Serbian nationalists as a provocation. Bosnia was a province with a large Serb population that had been annexed by Austria-Hungary, angering many in neighboring Serbia who dreamed of a unified South Slavic state. The Archduke's visit was a symbol of imperial oppression they could not ignore. As the motorcade made its way through the city, a group of young Serbian nationalists, trained and armed by the Black Hand, lay in wait. Their first attempt failed. A bomb was thrown at his car. It bounced off and exploded under the vehicle behind, injuring several people. Shaken but determined, Franz Ferdinand altered his route. In a fatal moment of confusion, his driver was not informed, made a wrong turn, and stopped to reverse just feet from a conspirator. That conspirator was 19-year-old Gavrilo Princip. Seizing the unexpected opportunity, Princip stepped forward, drew his pistol, and fired 2 shots at point-blank range. The first bullet struck Sophie. The second hit Franz Ferdinand. The couple died within minutes. The assassination was a shocking act of political violence, but few believed it would lead to a world war. It looked like another tragic Balkan episode, but the bullet struck the fragile peace holding Europe together. Vienna was outraged. They saw it not as rogue terror, but as a direct attack sponsored by the Serbian state. This was their chance to crush Serbian nationalism once and for all. They wanted to punish Serbia, make an example of it, and reassert their authority in the Balkans. But an attack would likely draw in Russia. Austria-Hungary therefore turned to its most powerful ally for support, sending a message to Berlin asking what Germany would do if war came. The German response would set the stage for disaster. In the critical days following the assassination, the fate of Europe hung in the balance. The key moment came when Germany gave Austria-Hungary its full support. On July 5, 1914, Kaiser Wilhelm II issued what history now calls the blank check. He promised Austria-Hungary Germany would stand by its side, no matter what action it chose to take against Serbia. This German assurance was a massive gamble. It emboldened Austria-Hungary and gave its leaders confidence to take a hard line. But with Germany's backing, Austria-Hungary felt free to issue an ultimatum. On July 23, almost a month after the assassination, Austria-Hungary sent 10 harsh demands to Serbia. The ultimatum was humiliating and unacceptable. It demanded, among other things, suppress all anti-Austrian propaganda, allow Austro-Hungarian officials to participate in the investigation on Serbian soil. That last point violated Serbian sovereignty. Serbia had just 48 hours to reply. In a surprisingly moderate response, Serbia agreed to almost all demands, but rejected the clause allowing foreign officials inside its borders. Austria-Hungary used that partial rejection as its excuse. On July 28, 1914, Austria-Hungary declared war on Serbia. The first domino had fallen. Alliances began to kick in, dragging the great powers into the conflict. Seeing its Slavic ally and client state threatened, Russia ordered a partial mobilization to defend Serbia. This was a critical step. In 1914, mobilization was treated as an act of war. It took weeks to move millions of men, horses, equipment to the front, and no country would allow a rival to get a head start. Germany saw Russia's mobilization as a direct threat. The Schlieffen Plan depended on speed. Germany needed to defeat France before Russia fully mobilized. Germany declared war on Russia on August 1st. 2 days later, on August 3rd, Germany declared war on France. To reach France, German troops planned to march through neutral Belgium. Germany invaded Belgium on August 4th. That invasion triggered the final piece of the puzzle. Britain, pledged to defend Belgian neutrality, issued an ultimatum to Germany. When the ultimatum expired, Britain declared war. In just over a week, a regional dispute became a European war. As the summer of 1914 came to a close, the two opposing sides were clearly drawn. On one side were the Central Powers. Germany, Austria-Hungary, Ottoman Empire, joined October 1914. Bulgaria, joined 1915. Their main advantage was geographical. Easy movement between eastern and western fronts. Germany had the most powerful army, best trained, best equipped. Their goal was a swift victory using the Schlieffen Plan. Schlieffen Plan, a massive flanking maneuver. Through Belgium, encircle and destroy the French army. Force a quick surrender before turning to face the slow-mobilizing Russians. Opposing them were the Allied powers, the Entente. France, Russia, Great Britain, Japan, Italy, switched in 1915. United States. The Allies had the advantage of greater numbers and more resources. British Empire, global resources and colonies. Naval superiority, the British Royal Navy. Blockade the Central Powers, cut off overseas trade and colonies. Initial war aims were primarily defensive. France, defend itself and reclaim lost territory. Russia, protect Serbia and influence in the Balkans. Britain, defend Belgian neutrality and prevent German domination. Each nation entered the war with a sense of confidence, believing it was fighting a just and necessary cause. In Berlin, crowds cheered for the Kaiser. In Paris, the government called for a sacred union to repel the German invasion. In London, young men flocked to recruiting offices. In St. Petersburg, Russians rallied to defend their Slavic brothers in Serbia. This widespread enthusiasm was based on a fatal illusion. Everyone believed the war would be short and heroic. Soldiers on all sides were told they would be home by Christmas. No one was prepared for the reality of modern industrialized warfare. The leaders and generals were still thinking in 19th century terms, imagining swift maneuvers and decisive cavalry charges. They had no idea what machine guns would do. Modern artillery, barbed wire. The road to war was paved with miscalculation, and the world was about to pay an unimaginable price for it. With the declarations of war, Germany immediately put its Schlieffen Plan into action. The goal was to knock France out of the war quickly. German armies swept through neutral Belgium and into northern France. They pushed back the French and a small British expeditionary force. By early September 1914, they were on the outskirts of Paris. The French government fled the capital. It seemed Germany was on the verge of a swift victory. But the plan began to falter. The German soldiers were exhausted after weeks of marching. Their supply lines were stretched thin. The invasion of Belgium had brought the mighty British Empire into the war. The turning point came at the First Battle of the Marne. In a desperate counterattack, French and British forces halted the German advance. The fighting was ferocious. The French governor commandeered 600 Paris taxicabs. He used them to rush thousands of reserve soldiers to the front. The miracle of the Marne saved Paris and shattered hopes for a quick war. Both sides then tried to outflank each other in the race to the sea. Armies extended their lines northward until they reached the English Channel. By the end of 1914, the war of movement was over. A continuous line of trenches stretched nearly 475 miles. This was the birth of trench warfare. Both sides dug into the earth, creating complex networks of ditches, tunnels, bunkers. These were protected by massive fields of barbed wire, machine gun nests. Between the opposing trenches lay no man's land, a crater-pocked wasteland. For the next 4 years, millions would live, fight, die, in muddy, rat-infested trenches, locked in a brutal stalemate. This stalemate became a war of attrition. Generals launched massive offensives, hoping for a breakthrough. Battles like Verdun, the Somme. In 1916, they became infamous for their horrific scale of death. Verdun. Over 700,000 combined casualties in 10 months for a few square miles. The Somme. Nearly 60,000 British casualties on the first day, the worst single day in its history. These battles gained almost no ground, but consumed a generation, turning the Western Front into the world's most notorious killing field. Section 2. The Eastern Front and the Gallipoli Gamble. While the Western Front descended into a static trench war, the fighting on the Eastern Front was far more fluid. Vast territory, Baltic Sea in the north, Black Sea in the south. Germany, Austria, Hungary faced the massive forces of the Russian Empire. The sheer size of the front meant that trenches were less permanent, and armies engaged in huge maneuvers. Russia's greatest asset was its enormous population, which allowed it to field a seemingly endless supply of soldiers, often called the Russian steamroller. However, the Russian army was poorly equipped, badly led, and suffered from terrible logistical problems. Early in the war, Russia surprised the Central Powers by mobilizing faster than expected and launching invasions into Germany and Austria-Hungary. The invasion of East Prussia forced Germany to pull troops from the west. At the Battle of Tannenberg, German forces under Paul von Hindenburg and Erich Ludendorff inflicted a catastrophic defeat on the Russians. Russian prisoners of war, dejected, being marched away by German soldiers after the Battle of Tannenberg. This victory turned Hindenburg and Ludendorff into national heroes. Further south, fighting between Russia and Austria-Hungary was a bloody seesaw. The Austro-Hungarian army proved far less effective. Whenever it neared collapse, German reinforcements arrived to stiffen the lines and push the Russians back. This pattern would repeat throughout the war, all while the Russian army suffered staggering losses in men and equipment that its underdeveloped industry could not replace. In 1915, the Allies sought to break the deadlock by opening a new front. Winston Churchill championed a daring plan to attack the Ottoman Empire, a German ally. The goal of the Gallipoli campaign was to seize the Dardanelles Strait, capture the Ottoman capital of Constantinople, and open a sea route to supply Russia. In April 1915, Allied troops, primarily Australians and New Zealanders, along with British and French forces, landed on the Gallipoli Peninsula. They were met with fierce resistance from Turkish soldiers. The campaign quickly bogged down into its own version of trench warfare, with the Allies clinging to small beachheads under constant fire. It ended in a costly failure and evacuation. Section 3. War in the Desert and at Sea. Beyond Europe, the war raged across the deserts of the Middle East. The Ottoman Empire fought the Allies on several fronts. They battled the Russians in the Caucasus Mountains. They attacked the British-controlled Suez Canal. The British launched a campaign in Mesopotamia, aiming to seize valuable oil fields and capture Baghdad. This campaign, much like Gallipoli, started badly for the Allies. A British force was besieged and forced to surrender at Kut al-Amara in 1916. It was a humiliating defeat. A key figure in the Middle Eastern theater was a British officer named T.E. Lawrence of Arabia. Lawrence of Arabia. He recognized the potential of Arab nationalism as a weapon against the Ottoman Turks. He helped advise and support the Arab revolt that began in 1916. He worked with Arab leaders like Prince Faisal. They launched a guerrilla war against the Ottoman rulers. Arab forces, supplied by the British, attacked Turkish railway lines. They disrupted supply routes. They tied down thousands of Ottoman troops who could have been used on other fronts. The revolt weakened the Ottoman Empire from within and aided the eventual Allied victory in the region. While armies fought on land, a different kind of war was being waged on the world's oceans. Great Britain imposed a naval blockade on Germany. The goal was to slowly starve the Central Powers of food, raw materials, and war supplies. The blockade devastated the German home front. It caused severe food shortages and contributed to civilian hardship and unrest. Germany's surface fleet was largely bottled up in port. The one major fleet engagement, the Battle of Jutland in 1916, was inconclusive. Unable to break the blockade with battleships, Germany turned to the submarine, the U-boat, in 1915. And more intensely, in 1917, Germany declared unrestricted submarine warfare. This meant U-boats would sink any ship, including those from neutral countries, found in the waters around Britain. The campaign was highly effective, but it came at a huge political cost. The sinking of passenger ships, most famously the Lusitania in 1915, over 1,100 dead, including 128 Americans, caused outrage in the United States. Germany's U-boat campaign would be a key factor in provoking America to abandon its neutrality and enter the war. Section 4. The Great Stalemate and its Commanders. By 1916, the war had settled into a grim stalemate on its main fronts. On the Western Front, the lines had barely moved in 2 years despite the millions of casualties. On the Eastern Front, vast territories were exchanged, but neither side could land a knockout blow. The conflict had become a monstrous war of attrition, a gruesome contest to see which side could withstand the horrific losses longer. The initial hopes for a quick, decisive victory were a distant memory, replaced by the grim reality of industrial-scale slaughter. This stalemate was a product of military technology and outdated thinking. The commanders on both sides struggled to find a solution. Defensive weapons like the machine gun, barbed wire, had become far more effective than the offensive tactics used to attack them. In Germany, the heroes of Tannenberg, Paul von Hindenburg, Erich Ludendorff, eventually took supreme command. Their strategy was to force a decision through overwhelming violence, leading to brutal attrition battles like Verdun. In France, generals like Joseph Joffre and his successor Robert Nivelle continued to believe that enough artillery and enough manpower could achieve a breakthrough. They launched massive, costly offensives that repeatedly failed, leading to a collapse in morale and widespread mutinies in the French army in 1917. On the British side, the commander of the British Expeditionary Force from late 1915 was General Douglas Haig. Haig remains one of the most controversial figures of the war. To his critics, he was the butcher of the Somme, a callous commander who sent waves of men to their deaths in futile attacks. To his defenders, he was a determined leader faced with an impossible situation, who understood that a war of attrition was the only way to defeat Germany. He grappled with the challenges of coalition warfare, the introduction of new technology like the tank, and the immense pressure to deliver a victory. His leadership exemplifies the terrible dilemma faced by all the war's commanders. The stalemate meant that victory would not be won by a single brilliant battle. It would be decided by which side could mobilize its entire society more effectively and endure the most punishment. It became a test of industrial production, economic strength, and civilian morale. The commanders could order the battles, but the outcome was increasingly dependent on factors far beyond the trenches. It was about which nation could build more shells, grow more food, and keep its people from breaking under the immense strain. The Great Stalemate ensured that the war would become a total war, a conflict that would demand everything from every nation involved until one side finally collapsed. World War I was the first truly industrial war, where the assembly lines of the Second Industrial Revolution were repurposed to produce weapons of unprecedented lethality. The battlefield was dominated by new or improved technologies that made the old ways of fighting obsolete and, well, suicidal. The single most dominant weapon of the trenches was the machine gun. A small team of men with a single machine gun could mow down hundreds of attacking soldiers in minutes. Supporting the machine gun was modern artillery. The cannons of World War I were larger, more accurate, could fire faster than ever before. Massive artillery bombardments would precede every major offensive. The constant shelling turned landscapes into moonscapes. Barbed wire was used in massive quantities. A cheap but brutally effective way to slow down attackers, holding them in place for the machine guns to do their work. The stalemate forced both sides to innovate. In 1915, the Germans were the first to use poison gas on a large scale at the Second Battle of Ypres. Chlorine, phosgene, mustard gas, causing horrific injuries, blindness, slow, agonizing death by suffocation. Gas attacks created a new kind of terror on the battlefield, forcing soldiers to carry and use clumsy gas masks. In an attempt to break the deadlock of trench warfare, the British introduced the tank in 1916. These early tanks were slow, mechanically unreliable, hot inside, but they were armored vehicles that could cross no man's land, crush barbed wire, traverse trenches, offering a glimpse of the future of armored warfare. The war also took to the skies and beneath the waves. Aircraft evolved rapidly. At first, they were used for reconnaissance. Soon, pilots began carrying pistols, rifles, leading to the development of fighter planes. Larger planes, or bombers, were developed to drop explosives on targets behind enemy lines. Meanwhile, the submarine, or U-boat, proved to be a potent weapon of naval warfare. German U-boats targeted Allied shipping, aiming to starve Britain into submission, demonstrating that technology could now project deadly force far beyond the traditional battlefield. For the millions of soldiers who fought on the Western Front, life was a miserable cycle of boredom, terror, hardship. The daily routine in the trenches was governed by the constant threat of death. Soldiers typically spent a few days in the frontline trench, followed by a period in a support trench, then a short time in reserve behind the lines before the cycle began again. The most dangerous times were at dawn, dusk, the stand-to, when everyone was on high alert for an enemy attack. During the day, soldiers tried to stay hidden to avoid sniper fire. The nights were for work, repairing trenches, stringing barbed wire, conducting raids on enemy lines. The physical conditions were appalling. The trenches were often little more than muddy ditches, cold and wet. In rainy weather, they could flood, forcing soldiers to stand in knee-deep water for days, which led to a painful condition called trench foot. This infection could turn gangrenous, often resulting in amputation. The trenches were infested with rats. Lice were another constant torment. The smell was a nauseating mix of rotting corpses, overflowing latrines, unwashed bodies, and the lingering odor of poison gas and explosives. It was a squalid and dehumanizing existence. Beyond the daily grind, the scale of death and injury was unimaginable. Medical science was not prepared for the wounds inflicted by industrial weaponry. High explosive artillery shells and machine gun bullets created devastating injuries that often led to infection in the pre-antibiotic era. A wound to the gut was almost certainly fatal. Medical services were overwhelmed during major offensives. Despite the heroic efforts of doctors and nurses, millions of men died from their wounds. For those who survived, the psychological scars, then called shell shock and now known as post-traumatic stress disorder, could be just as debilitating as any physical injury. Despite the horror, soldiers found ways to cope and maintain their morale. Comradeship was essential. The intense bonds formed between men who shared the same dangers were a crucial source of strength. Dark humor, known as gallows humor, helped to make the unbearable reality more manageable. Soldiers wrote letters home, read newspapers, sang songs to pass the time. Yet the strain was immense. The constant fear, the loss of friends, and the feeling that their lives were being wasted for nothing took a heavy toll. For many, the war was a relentless nightmare from which there was no waking, an experience that would haunt them for the rest of their lives. World War I was a total war, meaning it demanded complete mobilization of entire societies. The line between frontline soldier and civilian at home blurred. Everyone was expected to contribute. Governments took unprecedented control of economies and people. Corset factories, car factories, converted to produce shells, rifles, uniforms. Governments rationed food, fuel, other essentials. Propaganda exploded onto posters, films, newspapers, to rally patriotism, to demonize the enemy, to encourage enlistment, to sell war bonds. The war transformed civilians' lives, especially women. Millions of men gone. Women stepped into new roles. Women in factories, women in munitions plants, dangerous conditions in factories. Women on farms, women tram and bus drivers. Women serving as nurses near the front. That contribution boosted the suffrage movement. Britain, Germany, United States, women won votes after the war. But the home front also endured immense suffering. The British naval blockade devastated Germany. By 1917, food shortages left people starving. The turnip winter of 1916–17 failed potato crop, turnips as main food. Malnutrition and disease swept civilians. That suffering fueled political unrest. Civilians faced direct attacks, Zeppelins, later Gotha bombers, air raids on British cities. The human cost reached far beyond battlefields. A lost generation left voids in communities. Millions of women widowed, and millions of children fatherless. Families torn apart by grief. Nations spent vast fortunes and sank into debt. The social fabric stretched to breaking. Ordinary people's sacrifices sparked discontent and political change. The war was destroying lives, and the old world, and its certainties. The year 1917 was the critical turning point of the war. After 3 years of bloody stalemate, the main combatants were exhausted. Their armies were depleted, their economies were strained to the breaking point, their populations were growing weary of the endless slaughter. In France, the failure of the Nivelle offensive led to widespread mutinies. In Italy, the army suffered a catastrophic defeat. In Germany, food shortages and war weariness were fueling social unrest. In Austria-Hungary, food shortages and war weariness were fueling social unrest. It seemed the entire European order was on the verge of collapse. Two major events in 1917 would completely reshape the conflict and determine its final outcome. The first event was the Russian Revolution. By early 1917, the Russian Empire was crumbling under the immense strain of the war. The army had suffered millions of casualties. The home front was plagued by food shortages, political instability. In March, protests in Petrograd escalated into a full-blown revolution, forcing Tsar Nicholas II to abdicate. A provisional government tried to continue the war. In November 1917, a second revolution brought Vladimir Lenin and his radical Bolshevik party to power. Lenin promised the Russian people peace, land, bread. one of his first acts was to pull Russia out of the war, signing a separate peace treaty with Germany in early 1918. Russia's exit from the war was a massive strategic victory for Germany. It meant the end of the two-front war. Germany could now transfer hundreds of thousands of veteran troops to the west. The German High Command planned to launch a final, decisive offensive to win the war before the full weight of American power could be felt. For the Allies, the collapse of Russia was a disaster. It seemed that the balance of power had tipped decisively in favor of the Central Powers. But another event in 1917 would ultimately seal Germany's fate. That event was the entry of the United States into the war. America had remained neutral since 1914, though it had been a key financial and industrial supplier to the Allies. Public opinion began to shift against Germany, particularly because of its campaign of unrestricted submarine warfare. The final straw came in early 1917, when British intelligence intercepted and decoded a secret message. The Zimmermann telegram proposed a military alliance between Germany and Mexico, promising to help Mexico reclaim lost territory in Texas, New Mexico, Arizona. The public outrage, combined with continued U-boat attacks, led President Woodrow Wilson to ask Congress to declare war on Germany in April 1917. America's vast industrial might and fresh manpower were now on the Allied side. The war's finale arrived with a dramatic shift in momentum. In the spring of 1918, Germany launched a series of massive offensives on the Western Front. Known as the Spring Offensive, this was Germany's last great gamble to win the war before the American armies arrived in force. Using new stormtrooper tactics, they broke through the Allied lines and advanced deeper into France than they had since 1914. But the German army was exhausted, their supplies were dwindling, and they could not replace their heavy losses. The Allies, now bolstered by fresh American troops and under the unified command of French Marshal Ferdinand Foch, bent but did not break, and finally brought the German advance to a halt. Beginning in the summer of 1918, the Allies launched a powerful counteroffensive. Known as the 100 Days Offensive, this was a relentless series of attacks that pushed the German army back. The arrival of over 1 million American soldiers, the Doughboys, provided the crucial manpower and morale boost. New tactics combining infantry, artillery, tanks, and aircraft finally broke the long stalemate of trench warfare. The German army, its spirit broken and its resources depleted, began to collapse. Simultaneously, Germany's allies, Bulgaria, the Ottoman Empire, and the crumbling Austro-Hungarian Empire all surrendered one by one, leaving Germany to stand alone. Faced with military defeat on the battlefield and revolution at home, the German High Command informed their government that the war was lost. The Kaiser was forced to abdicate, and a new German Republic was declared. On the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month of 1918, an armistice was signed in a railway carriage in the forest of Compiègne, France. The guns on the Western Front finally fell silent. The Great War was over. The immediate outcome was the Treaty of Versailles in 1919, a peace settlement that forced Germany to accept blame for the war, pay crippling reparations, and lose territory. Old empires, the German, Austro-Hungarian, Russian, and Ottoman, were dismantled, and the map of Europe and the Middle East was redrawn. The long-term consequences of World War I shaped the entire 20th century. The immense loss of life created a lost generation. The harsh terms of the Versailles Treaty fostered a deep resentment in Germany that would later be exploited by Adolf Hitler, sowing these seeds for the Second World War just 2 decades later. Yet, the war also spurred social change, including the advancement of women's rights. Remembering this cataclysmic event is essential. It teaches us about the dangers of unchecked nationalism and alliances, the horrific potential of modern warfare, and how the pursuit of a short, glorious war can lead to unimaginable suffering and change the world forever.